Welcome to Bio 112, the Introduction to Biology. My name is Dr. Shay Spencer. Um, this is our first class. I'm just going to kind of give you guys a brief recording for every chapter that we go over. Feel free to listen to them if they're helpful. They probably will be. I probably will tell you what's important for the exam. But again, you have 2 hours for the exam, so these may not even be useful or needed. But originally, I am from Paintsville, Kentucky. I grew up in a little place called Thelma. I went to the University of Pikeville. After high school, I went on to Kentucky College of Osteopathic Medicine, graduated there in 2021. And then I went to the University of Kentucky, practiced medicine for a year before coming back and being with you guys. I teach this course, Bio 112. I also teach Anatomy and Physiology 1 and 2. And I teach this class in person as well. If you guys have any questions or if there's anything that I can help you with, please let me know. I want you guys to do well. I want you guys to be prepared, have all your questions answered. I'm not looking to fail anybody. I'm looking for everybody to get through this course and hopefully have fun and learn something. I'm a pretty laid back guy, so feel free to send me a message anytime that you guys have a question, and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. I don't claim to know everything. I claim to know a lot of things, but if I don't know it, I'll ask somebody that does, or I'll research it and figure it out. So let's get started. So what is biology? Biology is the area of scientific study that focuses on understanding all aspects of living organisms. So essentially, biology ranges from a bunch of different areas. It ranges from molecular biology to zoology, which is the study of animals, botany, which is the study of plants, down to genetics, which is the blueprint of what makes you who you are. There's also medicine. So as you can see, biology encompasses really various amounts of diversity. So why would diversity in the scientific community play an important role in addressing how science can address the needs of our society? I know that's kind of a lot to break down. You can pause the video, but as I was reading through the text in your book, this is one of the questions that they kind of asked, and it took me a minute just to sit and kind of think about this. But why is diversity needed in the scientific community, essentially, is what this is asking. And it's really because there's so many different areas of concern, from climate change to emerging disease, that we have to have a diversity of different areas of biology. So you may find, and I hope this is the case throughout this course, that you are actually interested in biology, because it takes a village in order to kind of tackle this thing we call life. So as you can see here, I kind of listed some of them earlier. Conservation, ecology, which is just the study of the ecosystem. Marine biology, if some of you are interested in if the marine life, talking about the things living in the ocean, whether it be dolphins, sharks, or just things like jellyfish, fish in general. Medicine, for example, different areas of medicine, OBGYN, which is your female doctor, or it could be your pediatrician, it could be your surgeon, it could be just your regular old family doctor. Microbiology, which is just the study of things at a microscopic level, could be viruses and bacteria. As you can see on this screen, I have Steve Irwin, rest in peace, the crocodile hunter. He was, I guess you would consider him a zoologist. He was kind of popular whenever I was growing up. Of course, he was, I think, stung by a stingray and then passed away. And then, of course, over here on the right side of the screen, you have Dr. Anthony Fauci. And I put him on this. I put him on this slide just for importance. This is why diversity is so important, because through Steve Irwin, we've learned so many different things about animals in general. But you also need individuals like Dr. Fauci, who um, was able to really kind of guide us through the pandemic. Um, kind of uh, pioneered and getting us on track whenever it came to HIV and AIDS in the 80s. Um, so it takes just a diverse amount of people in order to tackle these different things. That's really, if I didn't tell you guys, this slide in particular is not very important. This is just kind of an introduction, saying, why do I need to care about all of these things? Well, first of all, biology is the study of life. As we're walking through this thing called life, I'm just going to kind of explain to you how things work. And I just kind of wanted you guys to see that there's different areas of biology. It's not essentially all the same. There might be some things that you study and didn't really realize that we covered in this course. And I hope that I know you guys aren't majoring in biology. This isn't a course for the biology major, but maybe I can just spark your interest a little bit. If there's anything that you want me to cover, curious about, shoot me an email and I'll see what I can do. But we'll actually get into the material now, and I'll kind of tell you guys what's important, what may come up on exams. That way you can kind of highlight or make a little note. So here we go. The study of life. This is chapter 1. Of course, me, Shay Spencer. So again, before I start, this slide is important because this slide's really explaining all life generally shares the following characteristics. I believe this is called the endosymbiotic theory. You don't need to know that word. Essentially, just need to know these points. Life is organized. Think about whenever I'm explaining life, I want you to think about us in general, the human body. The human body is organized, right? The human body requires materials and energy, and of course, we know we get that through food. Through the ingestion of food, our body breaks it down into nutrients, and the nutrients is taken up by cells, and the cells will use those nutrients in order to convert it through these little biochemical reactions at a cellular level. Again, that's not important, but what is important is just knowing that in order to survive, in order to be considered alive, we have to have material and energy. And of course, living things reproduce and develop. So we have an organization. We have human life is organized. In order to survive and thrive, we have to have energy. We get that in the form of food. And again, as we grow up, we're able to reproduce. Those are the 3 things that kind of make sense to me. And then these other ones, maybe not as much, but I'll kind of try to explain these along the way. But responding to the environment. So that is an important point. If you're sitting in the back of my classroom and I scream at you, you're going to be surprised. And you may even jump out of your seat. You may get scared. Or if it's raining outside or it's really cold, you're going to know to come inside. You're going to know to seek dry weather or a dry climate, or shelter. So you're responding to your environment. Just as I think the example later on in the PowerPoint will talk about a sunflower and a flower in general. And as the flower, as the sun is coming and beaming down on it, it starts to grow towards the sunlight. It's responding to its environment. This next point, that word homeostasis is important. It'll come up probably on exam. Actually, I'm pretty sure all of these points come up on an exam. But maintaining an internal environment, homeostasis, and all that essentially is it just life maintains a balance. The example I use later on is if whenever we begin to get hot, our body will do something called vasodilation, where our blood vessels dilate or get bigger. And as it gets bigger, our body's able to release heat, and we release that heat in order to cool us down. So our body has these built-in mechanisms, these built-in things that helps us survive. And again, as the opposite, if our body was to begin to get cold, we would try to conserve as much energy as possible. And we would do that in the form of what we call vasoconstriction. So I want you to think about blood vessels getting tinier and compressing, constricting, getting smaller, and we do that to maintain heat. Again, these are not important, what you need to know is that our body has built-in mechanisms to keep us alive, to maintain that balance. Um, and then this last point, the capacity to adapt to environment. So this is essentially just talking about um, living throughout time. Humans will develop these traits or these characteristics that help them to survive. And um, an example would be Charles Darwin, the founder of the theory of evolution. He begins speaking about these birds. He visited this tropical area, and these birds were in this area where um, I guess there were some insects or something. Um, but essentially, the birds, their beaks grew different than the other birds, like in different areas. They were isolated to this specific area. And these birds developed these beaks over a series of time. They adapted to their environment in order to hunt for prey. Um, so that's kind of an example. So we'll go on. We will go on and let's see. We'll go on to actually get into these points in general. So this is important. So the characteristics of life. I'm going to go actually into these points individually now. Like I said previously, all living things are organized. So all living things, the cell is the basic structural unit of life. That definition is important. It's actually written in this PowerPoint later on that will show up in an exam. And then I just want you to realize that we start out small to large. So we start out at a cellular level. Cells come together to form tissues. Tissues come together to form organs. Organs come together to form organ systems. Organ systems come together to form organisms. That's the major point that we're going on. Just some definitions here. Molecules are groups of atoms joined together. You can see over here, this is a backbone of DNA. You have a phosphate backbone, pentose phosphate backbone. Then you have nucleic acids, and you have a deoxyribose. Those are the three things that makes up DNA. That will also be most likely show up on an exam. Again, it's written in chapter 2, so no need to take notes on that right now. But just an example, that's DNA. Molecules, there are groups of atoms. Atoms are distinct subatomic particles that represent a particular part of an element. So here we have the cells, the smallest unit of life, in both structure and function. That's important. So here we go. Here's some more definitions. And I've always been told by teachers that definitions make very good test questions. So knowing these are very important. But they're pretty self-explanatory, which is good. I want to use the heart as an example, okay? I'm going to use the heart. The physician in me is coming out, and I'm going to kind of use the heart as an example. So we said previously on this slide that the cell is the smallest unit of life, both in structure and function. So myocardial cells, right? You have the heart is made up of myocardial, meaning muscle, cardio, heart. Myocardial cells. Myocardial cells come together to form myocardial tissue. Myocardial tissue makes up an organ called the myocardium, which is essentially the heart. So the heart, together with all the arteries and the veins, makes up the cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular system is an example of an organ system. And then if we have various other systems like the digestive system, the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, those all come together to form an organism. So again, cells come together to form tissue. We said the myocardial cell came together to form the myocardial tissue, just a group of myocardial cells. Groups of myocardial tissue comes together to form the myocardium, which is just the heart. And whenever you get the heart in connection with the veins and arteries, that forms the cardiovascular system. And then whenever you have a different groups of systems like the nervous system, the digestive system, and the cardiovascular system, that makes up an organism. So here could be an example of how somebody might write an exam question. For example, do you have a physician or a doctor who's coming in and he studies the duodenum, which is just a form of the small intestines. He also studies and practices medicine that deals with the stomach, the small intestines, the liver, and the large intestines. So, which of the following terms would best describe what he studies? Would it be he studies tissues, he studies organs, he studies organ systems, or he studies cells? And of course, we know that would be organ systems. So, organ systems, because those are all organs. The small intestine's an organ, the liver is an organ, the large intestine's an organ, and the stomach's an organ. So that could just be how somebody could test you on that. Moving on. Again, these are just definitions. They are important. They'll probably show up on an exam. So all the levels of biological organization extend beyond the individual. So we have species. So in order to be considered a species, you have to be able to successfully breed. These are just groups of interbreeding organisms. Species come together, a group of species come together to form a population, and then a group of population comes together to form a community, and then groups of communities come together through interaction and form an ecosystem. So the way I would relate this to you would be, let's say that your grandpa or your papa, as I call mine, let's say he's got a pond, or he's got a farm, right? He's got a farm, and he's got a pond on that farm, and in that pond he's got a bunch of different species of fish. He's got catfish, he's got bluegill, and he's got sundats, right? So those would be individual species. So you would have a species of catfish, a species of bluegill, and a species of sundat. If we talked about the species belong to that particular area, like the fish, we call that a population of fish. And then populations that interact. So let's say there's also some. Let's say there's also some. There's some birds on that place. There's some birds on your papa's farm that come together and that eat the fish when they come up, right? Or there's some deer that come and drink from the water. That would make up the community. That'd be a community, and all of the populations that interact there, that would be considered an ecosystem. So that would be an ecosystem. So moving on, we have living organisms need an outside source of material and energy to maintain their organization. So like I said earlier, humans, for example, that's just the easiest form I can, it's just the easiest example. We obtain our energy by eating food, and we take that food and we break it down at a cellular level to nutrients, and the nutrients are able to be taken up by cells, and the cells will utilize the nutrients and break them down through biochemical processes that occur at the cellular level in organelles. For example, glucose is taken up by your cells, and glucose is used in different biochemical reactions, one being the citric acid cycle, which takes place in the mitochondria. That's occurring at a cellular level. So living organisms, the main point to know is just that they need an outside source of material and energy to maintain their organization. Energy is defined by the capacity to do work. We need food in order to survive and in order to be able to do work. And then the processes that I describe occurring at a cellular level, that is just known as metabolism. Those are all the chemical reactions that occur in a cell. So you may have heard that your sister, she's skinny because she's got a fast metabolism. She's able to break things down quicker. She's able to take that glucose up and use it directly because her metabolism's a little quicker than yours. Whereas you take the glucose up and you shun it to the through another reaction in order to store it as fat. This overall is just describing metabolism. Um, so the main thing on this slide is just knowing that living organisms need an outside source of material and energy to maintain their organization. So life has the capacity to reproduce and develop. Just knowing what reproduction is just the ability to make another organism like itself. So you can have this through two different mechanisms, right? So humans are multicellular organisms. They need both a sperm and an egg in order to come together and go through different meiotic divisions. We'll learn about that later on. And this is how we reproduce. Whereas something like a unicellular organism, I can't remember exactly which it is, but they can undergo a process called binary fission where they just simply split and they can clone themselves essentially. But main thing is just know these definitions: reproduction, make another organism like yourself, and then development. So babies obviously go through development. They go through a neonatal stage. They go through a stage as toddlers, and then they become adolescents, they become teenagers, and then they become adults. Living organisms reproduce through genetic instructions known as genes. Remember, I talked about genetics earlier. This is just the study of genes. Genes are made up of DNA, which is just deoxyribonucleic acid. We'll talk about this later on. Just knowing these definitions for now is sufficient. The ability to respond to your environment. So behavior. We all have a behavior which is self-directed or in response to a stimulus. So if Jimmy's sitting in the back of the room and he's asleep and I scream at him, he's going to wake up, probably be scared. His heart is going to begin racing. This is all just to do these three things. Behaviors meant to minimize injury. It's meant to keep you alive, to stay away from things that will kill you, reproduce, and get food. These are the basic things that we need in order to survive. I have over here on this slide a picture of the prefrontal cortex. Again, this is the physician in me. This is the part of the brain that formed in order to keep you alive. It's responsible for all of these different things: fear modulation, empathy, emotional regulation. It's your fight or flight system, controls that in connection with the limbic system. So not really important for you to know all these fancy words, just knowing that behavior is meant to do these three things. That's pretty much the point of this slide. So again, I said, imagine it's the end of the day and you have a 4 o'clock class, but you haven't been able to eat all day. Chances are your stomach is growling and you can't focus on what the teacher's saying. Not that you are anyway. How do you stay alive? Well, your body wants to maintain an internal environment. Remember that fancy word we called homeostasis. Homeo means body, stasis is just a balance. So homeostasis. So your liver undergoes a process called gluconeogenesis. Don't need to know that word. But essentially, as your stomach's growling and you're hungry, your body's trying to keep you alive until you can get to another food source. So it begins through those series of reactions that we talked about in metabolism. It begins to break down glucose, and your body will use that glucose in order to keep you alive until you can get to food again. So homeostasis, just the process of maintaining an internal environment. Again, the picture that I have listed here, just talking about your body temperature falling, blood vessels constrict in order to conserve heat. Your body temperature rises, you're really hot, your blood vessels dilate, resulting in heat loss in order to keep you alive. Life has the ability to adapt. As the environment changes, some individuals may possess certain features that make them better suited for the new environment. These features are known as adaptations. I have here an example of an adaptation. So your book talks about the Tibetan monks, or the people that lived at higher altitudes. I think the book said that they will live as far as 12,000, 13,000 feet above sea level, and that's pretty extreme. So they live at this higher environment and the atmospheric pressure drops. When the atmospheric pressure is thinner, your body senses that it's lacking oxygen. In order to compensate for that, your body is going to produce more hemoglobin. This is all good and fine, and it's a great thing, but chronically, you can get something called chronic mountain sickness. These are people who live at extreme heights. They produce more hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin thickens the blood, can cause what we call hypertension or just elevated blood pressure, and can make you more prone to develop blood clots. So, in order for these Tibetan monks to live at these higher elevations, they begin expressing a gene that actually caused them to produce less hemoglobin, because it makes sense. They're living at these higher elevations, so their body's going to produce more hemoglobin over time. Um, in order to adapt, they begin producing less hemoglobin, being born with producing less hemoglobin. That way, they would just kind of balance out. So that's just an example of adaptation that occurred over time. Not important to know chronic mountain sickness. I just wanted to give you guys an example of what adaptations are. So we'll move on to the next portion of the chapter. This is just the classifications of life. These are some definitions: taxonomy, discipline of identifying and grouping organisms; systematics is the study of evolutionary relationships. The most important thing on this slide is just knowing this portion down here: species. Species are groups of interbreeding organisms. These are the most inclusive of all. They all share more similar features. As you go further up this lineage, you become less inclusive. So species come together to form genus, genus come together to form family, family form order, order forms class, class forms phylum, phylum forms kingdom, kingdom forms supergroups, and supergroups form domains. I think I came up with a mnemonic whenever I studied this, just something to help me memorize it. But for your purposes, if a test writer was going to write a question, he may ask you something like to order these or to put these in order. That may show up on an exam, or just knowing that the domain is the largest of the subclasses. That would be important. Knowing the species is the group of interbreeding organisms. Knowing the three domains, that's important as well. Just knowing that it's archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. Just knowing those three things. ABE, archaea, bacteria, eukarya. So both the archaea and the domain bacteria contain single-cell prokaryotes. Prokaryotes lack membrane-bound nucleus and organelles. That's important. So the eukaryotes and the prokaryotes differ. Due to the fact that eukaryotes contain membrane-bound organelles. Remember those little tiny structures that exist inside of cells? They're responsible for performing all the different functions inside of cells. Some of them produce proteins. Some of them produce the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell. It's an example of an organelle. And the nucleus, it contains all of your chromosomes, all of your genetic information. But just knowing that those are contained inside membrane-bound organelles that have a membrane around them, that have a protective area, whereas prokaryotes, those do not. They don't have a nucleus and they don't have organelles, whereas eukaryotes do. Here, just knowing this is the process of science. So I make this, your book makes a statement: religion, ethics, and science are all ways in which humans seek order in the world. Science it's kind of unique because we have a different way of knowing and learning because of a scientific process. We have something called the scientific method. And all this is it's just a standard of logical steps used for studying the natural world. Knowing this science is pretty important.